idea about how, although as a paranormal investigator and researcher, you're out there in the field and you don't see these things, how they do in fact communicate with us, and to give you a better idea about how to read your own body and your own mind to know when a spirit is out there ready and willing to communicate with you. First, we'll start out by just reviewing the five senses. Your normal, everyday ways of communication. You've got touch, you've got smell, you've got sight, you've got hearing, and you've got taste. Sorry, my allergies are going off. Work with me. So, touch, hands, basic things like that. Smell, obviously, that's done with our nose. Sight is done with our eyes. Hearing is done with our ears. And taste is done with our tongues. When you speak to someone, they hear you. When you touch someone, they get touched. When you smell something, it smells great, or it smells like absolute trash. Those two ends of the spectrum aren't always the only ones. The same thing when you taste something. It either tastes good or it doesn't. Now, human beings, our normal way of communication is through sight, talking, touch, and I like to include this one, but emotions. All of these things typically emit some kind of emotion. So human communication, to me, is emotion. It's how we bring about responses in one another. Now, from person to person, these things are all very simple and clear to us. I can touch you, you touch me. I can smell dinner, I can smell you. That elicits a response. When I see you, I either feel great or I'm happy to see you, or I just see you to communicate. I hear you talking to me. I see sign language. I just covered hearing. Same thing for taste and the tongue. Now, the big thing I'm going to want to really get you to understand is, how do all of these things relate to speaking and interacting with a non-physical entity, as I like to call them, or a spirit, a ghost, whatever you run into out there in the field. So, when you think about this human to human interaction, we have to start looking at something beyond the five senses, beyond touch, smell, taste, sight, and hearing. When do we, as human beings, have more than this? When that occurs, what we end up with is this: ESP, extrasensory perception. Now, not a lot of people buy into this, but if you're a paranormal investigator, researcher, parapsychology researcher, or if you're a parapsychologist, fully educated, thanks for watching this video, you start to consider these things. ESP. So what portions of ESP do we use in normal human to human, person to person communication? One, intuition, telepathy. In some ways, clairvoyance. And empathy. Now, intuition in itself deals with feelings. You know, right, I was going to find a way to abbreviate that verse, wrong. Telepathy is a communication one, you know, voices, messages. Clairvoyance is like discernment. I think I spelled that wrong. Let's see. You know, seeing things and objects. And empath is emotions, the transference of emotions. So I'll explain these all real quick. Intuition is basically how you understand something without conscious reasoning. It just comes to you unconsciously. Telepathy is a direct transference of thought from the sender to the receiver without the use of normal sensory means, those five senses. Clairvoyance is how you're going to perceive objects and images and things like that without the normal sensory channels. Empathy, or you'll hear people say, I'm an empath, is the ability to understand and share feelings and make them your own with someone else. Telepathy, clairvoyance, and being an empath deal directly with transferring of messages and energies without using those five senses. Intuitive thought is really just you coming to conclusions like that and saying, you know, intuitively, I don't feel like this is good. Now I'm not going to do that. Now the reason I harp on these is because while they are outside of the five senses, they do very much use the five senses. So what I really want to emphasize here was how typical person to person communication works. And in person communication, it starts with the five senses. You start with your communication. You start with visual. Then you go to, you know, verbal or physical communication. You see someone, hey, how's it going? It's good to see you. You know, it elicits emotions. And many times the emotions start to decide how you talk to someone and how you physically interact with them. So person-to-person communication starts with everything that you can perceive. The visual brings on the emotional state, or you get there and you're emotionally charged, and then what you see and what you hear and what they say to you starts to trickle down effect of how you communicate. Now, the thing that extrasensory perception brings to the table in person-to-person communication is you start with the ESP, and then the ESP brings about the five senses. You know, your intuition might guide you to talk. It might make you back off. But this is basic human communication. But when you involve the ESP, the ESP begins to let you sort of talk as you might need to, or as you might want to. Now, something to consider inside of how ESP affects a conversation with human to human is, are you receiving a telepathic message? Some people that have been around each other can cue each other in without a word. In terms of clairvoyance, Do you see this person? And are you, you as the ESP sensitive person, what are you seeing with them? Are you seeing they're good to go? Are you seeing negative images of them? What are you beginning to understand? The empathic individual, this person may be in a horrible mood and you're all good. But as an empathic individual, this bad mood starts to get transferred to you. And you'll tell them, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And then from there, the ESP portion of your five senses begins to drive everything. So this is how ESP comes into play, how you communicate with someone, how it changes how you interact with the world. Now, what I want you to remember about ESP is in person-to-person communication, your five senses will try and drive things. But when you intuitively trust your ESP and things like that, it starts to make things go for you. Okay? So we talked about ESP. We talked about the five senses. And we talked about how conversation and interaction can be driven from two places: five senses to ESP, or ESP to five senses. And how each conversation, based on where you start, dictates response and communication. So what we're going to get into now is how ESP drives communication with non-physical intelligences. Non-physical intelligence are ghosts, spirits, and unseen intelligence. The whole term non-physical intelligence is something I use to just put all of those things that are not seen into one spectrum. Could be jinn, elementals, etc. You name it. You can't see it, but it's very intelligent. That's your thing. Okay. So what we have here is an MPI. This guy wants to communicate with you. What we have over here are two people talking. They use their five senses primarily, with extrasensory perception hidden at the bottom. Our spirit over here is going to communicate primarily in a manner that requires you to use your extrasensory perception. These guys, they'll touch, they'll speak, they'll hear, they'll taste, and they'll smell. This guy over here can touch, can speak, can hear. If they can taste and smell, I don't know. We can assume yes. This little point here in the middle is when all things become equal. over here, they're going to use their hands. They're going to use their speech. We'll just say speech. They're going to use their ears to hear. They're going to use their tongues to taste. And they're going to use their nose to smell. What we have to define is, how is this guy over here going to speak to these guys over here? And what we'll do is we'll take a closer look at how this NPI, this non-physical intelligence, or this ghost or spirit, communicates with us. Here he is. How is this guy right here going to use our 5 senses to communicate? When we're dealing with person to spirit communication, we have to look very much at the non-physical communication factor. You have touch, taste, smell, sight, and then like speech / hearing. I wanted to take a pause here before we get to this section and explain to you some things that I include. Primarily, it's the term PK manifestation, or PK. This means psychokinesis or psychokinetic energy. Now, when I bring this up, I'll say that the MPI uses PK to manifest some things like touching or general movement of objects and some other things. What I want you to understand here is I start to really involve a theory of mine that PK energy isn't something that is solely contributed to a spirit in a physical body like we are. I very much believe that PK energy and things of that form exist outside of us, and that these MPI actively use this. Now, is there a better term? Eventually I'll figure that out, but the same methods that we use to make PK manifestations, or we have individuals who create PK manifestations or have psychokinetic energy in themselves and can use it at will. I think that these spirit bodies, or these MPIs, have that same potential. The biggest difference here is that they're removed from a physical body, but they still possess the ability to move things and sway the laws of physics to their liking to accomplish a goal. So when I say PK manifestation as a form or a method of action for these MPI, please understand that I'm incorporating a theory that I believe, and that this is how I feel they create and they move objects outside of a physical body. I'll make a video on that at some point, but for right now, please do not get too wrapped up in the notion that psychokinetic energy, our manifestations, poltergeists, things like that, are something that exists solely inside of a person. These things are, to me, are very applicable to any form of intelligence who can manipulate energy. So, we have to start thinking, how will these things interact? How have they interacted with us? Now, physically speaking, through touch, things get moved. Cans get thrown, doors will open, water can get turned on, they can touch us, people have been scratched. These things are PK manifestations. That's a little sloppy abbreviation. Typically, people relate this to poltergeist or poltergeist activity. Some people like to say they're malevolent. Look, if I spell something wrong, you get the gist. Now, these things can be large or small occurrences. So, inside of us, they elicit goosebumps, reactions, spidey senses. You know, my spidey senses are tingling. That's what's going on. A spirit will communicate with us through this. PK manifestations typically come from psychokinesis energy. This energy comes from the body, the spirit body, and in this case, this guy's little energy field. And that's how I move things. These are typically known to be more powerful entities or manifestations of an individual with PK, or PK manifestations, things like that. In this ghost situation, turning a doorknob or opening a door or turning on the water or scratching you, these are all the ways that it conveys touch. These are extrasensory perception things, and for him, outside of his body, we become sensitive to this. These goosebumps, these spider senses, our bodies react to that because our receptors and things feel it. Taste, I don't know if they can taste things. I know they like, tobacco smoke and things like that. People use that as trigger objects. The same thing with smell. What do they like to give us? We have phantom smells. You smell perfume in a room that's not supposed to be there. You smell cigar smoke that's not supposed to be there. Cigar smoke I'm skeptical of, because those things and perfume smells, they permeate the walls and heat releases those smells. So if you're smelling typically a phantom smell, it's going to be a very small localized thing, like an orb that just hangs out and you'll smell it. Now, in terms of sight, speech, and hearing, we're going to open up a new tab for that. So, sight. There are multiple ways these things can be seen. From an ESP standpoint, we have clairvoyance. That can help us see them. Let's see, there's some forms of telepathy. And if those things really don't come, you have a simple manifestation. Where this guy right here is going to project himself out. Let's give you a better picture. They'll project themselves out and they'll appear as a person. And you'll see the person. You might see the upper half only. You might see the bottom half walking around. But that's how they project out, as a manifestation. And what this is, in my theory, is their auric body being able to transfer over to our reality, so to speak, and provide you with a manifestation that you see visually with your eyes. When we talk up here about clairvoyance and telepathy, this is an ESP portion for us. Typically psychics, mediums of different variety can see these things, and they'll tell you, the psychic medium, they'll say, hey, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z. And this is typically something that they or us might relate to the third eye, but they'll say, hey, this guy's projecting an image on me, and inside this image it's showing me all of these things about itself. It's showing me that it had a family, it lived in a nice big house, it died as a result of a fire, it's happy, it's sad. It projects the emotion for the medium to see, and then the medium relays this, and the medium in this situation is heavily using their ESP. Now, when we go and we speak about them speaking, are them hearing. This is the same process. Down here we have a digital medium to help us. We're using a recorder, a camcorder, you know, a ghost box / spirit box, or some kind of application. And here, through this, you know, the spirit will say hello. And this is usually as a result of EVP. We also have them speaking to us directly through a disembodied voice. Now here, for a psychic medium, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I had to change my my writing tool on here. The psychic medium uses telepathy or clairvoyance to speak to the spirit, and the spirit will tell them a lot more than we can get. So through EVP we have to really cipher out the digital part. Sometimes we can get whole sentences, sometimes we get things in context, out of context with the spirit, sometimes we might get a name. But when you deal with a psychic medium, they can get names, information that we cannot get. They can get visual information from them and more, because they are using their ESP to communicate directly with this thing's field, and they receive the information that way. So when we're talking about how these things speak to us, how they might see them, this is what we're dealing with directly, okay? So to review this really quick, touch can happen through PK manifestations, typically categorized in the poltergeist activity. This malevolent activity, I just don't really ever agree with it, because, excuse me, the malevolent activity I don't always agree with, because, you know, a lot of times these things are outliers. Malevolent activity is a complete outlier. Television and a lot of things we deal with really soup up the idea, because it's their bottom line. It gets them views. No one wants to hear about a nice, good, jolly spirit hanging around the house. But anyway, I'm on a tangent. The touching are PK manifestations, and our bodies pick up on them like goosebumps, spidey senses, and things like that. Taste and smell, we can use trigger objects, and they respond to trigger objects like cigarettes or incense or like favorite foods, even music. They produce phantom smells that we can smell. In terms of sight, you know, they can manifest. Or mediums and clairvoyants can see them through telepathy or clairvoyance. When we see and hear them, it's either due a digital medium or technology, or the same process above, telepathy, clairvoyance. Okay? Okay, so we went over how our 5 senses pertain to spirit interaction, and how ESP is that bridge, how a spirit might interact with us. So now we're going to just put those all together. When we spoke about touch, on our side, you know, we might get goosebumps. Over here, it's a PK energy release for them, where they might move things. When we talk about smell, over here for us, we get phantom smells. And here for them, it is another PK energy release where they produce the smell. In terms of sight, visually speaking, with just our eyes, we see manifestations. I forgot to spell that. Through ESP, we use clairvoyance and telepathy. In terms of hearing them, we have technology in our ears through disembodied voices. As well as telepathy and clairvoyance. In terms of taste, again, this is something I haven't experienced a lot. I don't know a lot of investigators who have. I haven't heard about it a ton. But in terms of taste, this would be something we'd actually experience with our tongue, or it could come through clairvoyance, through a medium, and their interaction in their minds with this individual spirit. And they can say, well, you know, I'm tasting what they're doing. She was a very good cook. And inside of our minds, this is all how all of those things work. Something we didn't touch on a lot is the empath. Jeez, I butchered that. There we go. All is right in the world. And how these guys right here can convey an emotion. So over here, we will get this emotionally. We will have an emotional shift. For our psychic mediums, this is all empathy. They take on the feelings of the spirit, and that's how they communicate. So when we look at this entire list of how our five senses interact through ESP, with the five senses are the projected feelings and emotions and touches, and are basically the projected five senses of an MPI. We begin to see how much ESP inside of a human physical body dictates how we interact with spirit. So here we'll just take a quick look at how ESP to five senses affects our communication. So for a spirit to touch us, we might feel the goosebumps, and then our ESP comes in, and we can then use our five senses to feel what a spirit truly wants. Now, when we connect ESP to spirit, we ask, you know, who, what, why? And the spirit will communicate with us if we open ourselves up telepathically and through clairvoyance and empathically to give us our answers. Now, if we want to hear them, we can use technology. But all of this is based on ESP to five senses. Okay? So to review this little situation here, we feel goosebumps from the energy of a spirit. Using our ESP, we begin to understand, okay, this is what's going on. We have a spirit here, and then through dictation of our five senses to ESP, we start to see we have a spirit, and we can ask who, what, where, and why, because we've sensed the spirit. Telepathically, through clairvoyance and empathically, our spirit that we're interacting with will give us the answers. If we want to hear them more and we're not getting what we need through our ESP, we can use technology, which everything goes through ESP to these 5 senses. Here's another situation. Let's say we go into a place and our intuition tells us there's a spirit. We start to feel what's going on with the spirit because we get spidey senses. We ask again, who and what? Our 5 senses want us to say, where is the physical? But our ESP gives us the spidey senses, gives us goosebumps. And visually speaking, we can start to see the spirit through telepathy and clairvoyance. Having an understanding of our own emotional capacity, we don't even need telepathy and clairvoyance, because empathically we might be able to connect with the feelings of this guy. So once we connect, then it starts to give us clairvoyant messages. It starts to tell us telepathically who it is, what it's doing there. And then even at a point through these 2 channels, it might say, hey, I have something here that belongs to me. And then even then, you can begin to use psychometry to figure out more about a spirit. You can use psychometry to put your hand on a wall to see spirit inhabitants. Now, if you're not familiar with psychometry, that's the ability to sort of get history off of an object. You know, you can put it in your hands or against your forehead, but it's a form of divination, and it uses sort of clairvoyance to establish information about an inanimate object. But it is still your ESP. Now, these 2 examples I've given you are just our ESP guiding the 5 senses. Okay? And you know, sometimes in some situations it may look a little fuzzy, but it's all about understanding that you're not doing a person-to-person conversation here. It's taking this and getting rid of it and understanding that you may be dealing with a non-physical intelligence. Now, this interaction right here is going to be your 5 senses dictating your ESP. So let's do an example of that. So you run into this spirit and it gives you goosebumps. Your 5 senses would say, visually speaking, do you see anything? No. Physically, did someone touch you? No. So mentally, what are you dealing with? A reaction of the body. Is there anything there that might be physical? Your logical mind? No. So do you get this communication with spirit? No. Because the 5 senses have told you we're not dealing with that. Now sometimes the 5 senses, I was going to write X, the 5 senses will keep you from accessing these higher portions of ESP. But if your ESP guides your 5 senses, then they sort of work as one, and you're allowed some extra level of extrasensory perception because you understand your 5 senses. And the gist of this is the same situation we were in before. You get goosebumps, you think about your five senses, your logical mind goes, I just got goosebumps to have goosebumps. You don't let yourself become aware and perceptive of the actual energies that are inside and around you. So the basis of this conversation was person to person communication and person to MPI or spirit communication. We broke down the five senses, which are touch, smell, taste, hearing, and sight, and bridge the gap between communication with non-physical intelligences through ESP, which basically covered telepathy, clairvoyance, empathic ability, and many more. I think I mentioned psychometry too. And how, oh yep, org, sight, how everybody has a wave that communicates these extrasensory perceptions. And basically what I wanted you guys to understand as paranormal investigators, that your five senses are great and that they get you through a lot of things in life, but that your extrasensory perception when dealing with these things is going to be the key factor to you opening up communication with spirit. Trust your extrasensory perceptions. When you run into a spirit and you run into something different, you know, have enough wherewithal to say, what am I experiencing here? Trust your ESP, trust your intuition, open your mind. There are more things out there that communicate through ESP in the unseen world that are going to touch you than that are going to use your five senses. A lot of times people say, well, I never see anything. Look, those are all outliers. For a spirit to have enough energy to manifest through psychokinetic energy of its own, to move something, to open doors, to turn on water, to do all those things you see on TV and in these extreme YouTube videos, those are outliers. They don't happen that often. Okay? For a spirit to physically manifest takes a lot of work. If it was that easy for them to speak, for them to start walking down the hallway, we wouldn't need technology and digital mediums to sort of bridge that gap. We would see it all the time. Disembodied voices don't happen all the time, but they do happen. And these things are all outliers. They just don't happen every day, every video. But when you go out and you want to make legitimate spirit communication, you have to use the extrasensory perceptions that God gave you. And start understanding through meditation and things like that what your baselines are and where your five senses are at. Because once you start to understand who you are as a human being, you'll start to better understand what extra things we've been given to communicate with all walks of life, both physically here in front of us and those of the unseen world. As always, please subscribe and like, and if you want, share. I'm doing a lot of these things on the fly, so I appreciate you guys checking it out and talking to me and looking it through. Thanks.